So it's been a long time since I've been in front of a camera. To keep things short and sweet, I do feel like I owe somewhat of an explanation. Me and my former partner, we separated around 3 years ago. I've been a single mom for about 3 years now. The name of the channel has changed, not just due to that, but just because I really want to focus this channel on being an outlet. I've tried so many different ways of having that therapy and journaling and reading and all of that, but I really wanted a creative outlet where I can create, I guess, video diaries documenting all the changes, the ups, the downs for my life. So it is now called Encyclopedia of Her. There's actually a funny story behind that name. When I was younger, I used to read encyclopedias. I wanted to know everything about absolutely everything. I just always have been like very curious, very creative, I don't know. So I had a diary. I didn't want anyone to find out that it was mine. A relative actually made a comment one day saying, you should call it Encyclopedia of Chelsea because you're always reading encyclopedias. But I was like, I gotta be mysterious. I don't want anyone to know that it's me, because if somebody sees Encyclopedia of Chelsea, they're gonna pick it up and be like, oh. So I would write in my diary in a third person narrative, and I called it Encyclopedia of Her so that nobody really knew who she was, even though the whole time she was me. And yeah, so I figured it'd be cute and sentimental to call my channel that as well. All that aside, I'm a single mom. This is gonna be for my video diaries, and life has just been coming at me at an overwhelming rate. Over the last few years, there have been so many changes and so much turbulence. So having an outlet, the whole idea of it just brings me peace. Being able to look back and be like, dang, I did that, I went through that, I'm on the other side and I'm okay. That's a big piece for me. To get into what I wanted to talk about today, as you can tell from the title, I recently decided to make a huge change in my life, and it was literally last week. And I wasn't thinking of making a video on it at the time, but it's just been weighing on me, and I've felt such a relief, and even in the way that I communicate with others and the way that I think of myself in the world, I felt like a big shift. And I thought it'd be nice to sit down and make a video in case anybody else is on the fence about choosing to recommit to the Lord, or that's been something that's been weighing on their mind, or even if you're just going through a hard time. I feel like it could help. It helped me a lot. So I don't really know where to start. So over the last, I want to say, decade, I have felt God's presence in my life at so many times. Recently the opportunity came up, and I just felt extremely convicted to explain my background in a religious sense. I was baptized when I was a baby through the Roman Catholic Church. I was an altar server, I had my communion, I had confirmation, all of that. But throughout all of that, I never truly felt connected to God. I understood quite a bit, but I never really was able to digest and feel God's presence in my life. I don't know if it was just the format for me, or even just a specific church that I attended, but it just never felt like there was a major connect when I was in the church. Like there was a sense of community, but there was never, I just never felt genuinely connected to God unless I was in isolation. Through that, I would pray, but the way that I would pray was almost like very like guided, very disciplined, very regimented. Hail Mary, Our Father, like where it was just routine repetition. So from a young age, that's all that I was doing because that's what I was taught. When I was younger, that all changed when my family experienced an extremely tragic event that actually resulted in the loss of my uncle. He passed away, and he was very young. It was very unexpected, very traumatic. There were so many questions. There was not much clarity, and I felt so confused. I was so young, so at that time, obviously it was hard to understand, but I just felt extremely helpless. And even in going to church, that piece was still missing. Around that time, I made a change in how I communicated with God. I would pray constantly, and instead of praying in repetition and praying these almost like rehearsed prayers that I was taught in school, I would just speak to God. Like, God, this is what's going on. I would pray for everything and everyone in my life. I would try to speak in a way that like anything that I was feeling about that loss was communicated to God so that it could be communicated to my uncle, because that was no longer something that I could directly do, or no longer something that I felt I could do. So I would speak to him through God, and I would pray over my family and pray over my friends and pray over my pets and humanity and everything like that. And as my younger sister got older, we would do it together. We actually turned our prayer into a song, And then we would just go through like a whole list of things, and whatever was going on in the day and whatever was going on in school and things like that, we would just speak directly to God. And that became my new way of prayer. And it was just something that was so different than what I was taught. So that was how I communicate with God. And then when I reached my teenage years, I went through an overwhelming amount of trauma. When I talk about it in therapy, I describe it as the series of unfortunate events of my life. There was just one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. You could write a whole book, movie, whatever, whole series of books about it. There was just so many things that just, I had that feeling of helplessness again. And confusion. I definitely strayed away from God at that time. There was a lot of rebellion, there was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of conflict, there was a lot of hurt, a lot of hate. I wasn't behaving in a godly way because the way that I was brought up, I was kind of like pulling away from that, but I would still talk to God on my own. It would always be in isolation. I refused to go to church with my mom. Around that time, I definitely strayed. There was a lot of tests. And yeah, later on I will definitely talk about some of those things because it's different. It's different. I would speak to God directly whenever I felt like I was missing him. I was only really going to God for my selfish needs. I was living a very worldly life where I would use my trauma and these horrible things as an excuse to do bad things. I picked up habits that I would never just choose to have, but it was my way of coping. I stopped seeing God as a way for me to cope. I don't know. There was a lot of influence in my life. There was a lot of friends, and definitely a lot of trials for me, and I failed many times. I cannot express how many times. But I always felt like God had me. God had me in his favor in so many ways. I chose to do so many horrible things. Not horrible, but like, I was just doing worldly things. I am human. When it came to my morality, I was making a lot of choices that definitely did not align with what God would have wanted for me. I didn't ever fully stop praying, but I was not consistent. I was definitely not obedient to anybody, especially not God. I did not have any kind of fear. I was full of judgment, and because of that, I made a lot of choices that prioritized me over everyone else. And that's something that I've learned from. I feel like a lot of people hold on to guilt, but you need to show yourself grace. You need to understand that those things, those choices that obviously in retrospect you wish you could change, you don't want to include them when you're looking at yourself as a whole, but they are part of who you are. And that is part of the life and the story that God has written for all of us. There's a lot that I continue to face, and now I continue to face it, but with a whole new perspective, as if a veil was lifted from me. My camera died. So things really took a turn when one of the biggest changes in my life came, which was when I became a mom. I found out I was pregnant when I was 20 years old. I was in university. I was living away from home. And when I found out, I felt so much peace, so much understanding, so much clarity, so much purpose. Every last thing about it made sense. There was never any hesitation. There was never any doubt. There was never any questioning. I went through a lot emotionally, mentally. Even just having a child at that age, there wasn't that many people I could relate to. I would always fall back on God. I started praying consistently from the moment that I found out I was pregnant. I kept talking to God the way that I used to when I was younger, and that spark reignited into something that was so beautiful and so intentional. The only, I don't want to say issue, but the only struggle for me in that was the partner that I was with. I was not equally yoked with. He was so amazing. There was so much about him that was lovable, but our paths were going in two totally separate directions, and we just kept trying to make them go together. And when it comes to my relationship with God, that was one thing. He was always supportive, but he never understood. He had a lot of struggles that he had dealt with in his life, but since he didn't have any type of connection with God, the way that he processed those things was so unhealthy for both of us. And as you guys know, we are now separated, but that was another time in my life where I felt like my connection to God just grew so strong because of the struggles that my partner had around the time of me deciding to leave. He was, I feel like I'll get into it in another video, but there was so much spiritual attack in my life. Anything that you could think of, from my religion to my appearance to my family to my parenting capabilities, to my education, to my race, everything was weaponized. And in those moments, at first I was emotional, but then after a period of reaching out to God, constantly trying my best to put my fear and my worry and all these concerns in my safe space, which was in isolation with God and through prayer, I was constantly reminded, show grace, be calm, don't give a reaction. All that hurt that was thrown at me, all that pain, all that weaponized depression, unhappiness, that had nothing to do with me. That was what I was constantly being told. That has nothing to do with me. That's not who I am. He is hurting. That is why. It came to that point where I knew to walk away. After that, becoming a single mom, I literally had negative $300 to my name when we first separated. And I had the house, 2 cars, all of that. I had our rent, everything was all left with me because that's just how things worked out. And at that point I was like, you know what? It's gonna take a whole miracle to make this work. I felt broken inside. I felt, based on my choice, I had essentially stripped my child of having that cohesive family, having the mom, the dad, everything that we had before, everything that you guys even seen before if you watched our channel before. I felt like I took that all away from him. But in the back of my mind, I was reminded there's purpose. Relax. There is a purpose behind all of this, and you are not doing anything that shouldn't be done. And it all worked out. Every last bit of it worked out. There were so many times where I felt like I had hit rock bottom. I pitched a tent there. I was comfortable until I chose not to be. I just kept leaning on the Lord and knowing this isn't it for me. My God loves me. This is not it for me. This is not it for my child. The major turning point for me, I had the most pivotal experience with God through my child. And that's what really set me straight when it came to seeking the relationship that I wanted my entire life with God. Not just in prayer, but like the community, everything. So one day I was actually driving with my grandma and my son. At this point, he was familiar with God. He had not been baptized. We would pray together, but at the same time, to my own error, I assumed that he was too young to comprehend the magnitude of God's love. I thought, okay, I'll introduce certain things, but that is because of my own experience, and that is what I've learned now at this time, looking back. It's because of the fact that I didn't comprehend at that age. So that's my bad, and I'm aware of that. But yeah, so I was driving and my son said, "Mommy, can you turn the music down?" So I turned the music down, and he said something I will never forget. He said, "You know, God used to talk to me all the time, Mommy, like all the time." And I was like, okay, all right. And he goes, "Yeah, when I lived up in the clouds with him, he would talk to me all the time. And then one day he told me that I needed to be with you. So he sat me down, and here I am with you now. And that's why I'm with you, because you needed me." I honestly, I was speechless. So I said, "Does God still talk to you?" And he said, "Yeah, from time to time, but it's not the same as when I was in the clouds." And from there, I made the active choice to seek out a community, that my walk with God was not something that was done in private before bed when I would pray alone. I wanted my son to see it. I wanted my son to be a witness. I wanted to further his relationship and find a community for him that I never had. I wanted to find it for both of us that I never had. One of my best friends actually suggested his church, and I have never felt more at home. I've been attending for just under a year now, because it did take time to find them. It definitely took time to find them. I tried out a few different things, but a few different places, and it never fully connected, but we found our place. And just recently, that's when they had said that they were going to be doing baptisms. I wanted to make sure that when I am consciously choosing to commit to God and show my faith and show my dedication and show that this is the way I want to live, my son would actually be able to be a witness for that. And he was there with the camera and he was so excited. He told everybody about it. He was taking pictures, videos. Mind you, there was no memory card in the camera, but he told me he was so proud of me. And to this day, I have always, there is not a singular part of me that would ever have doubt about what he told me. And I do believe that he was sent in my life. And when he had said that, it made everything make sense. Everything before I had him, everything after I had him, to this very day, to the way that I choose to show up as a human being in this world, to the perspective that I have, it all just makes sense. God knew I needed him. And yeah, that is my story. That is my testimony as to why I chose to get rebaptized. And I would love to break down a few more of the layers when it comes to the trials and errors, for sure, that I went through up to this point. But that is why I chose to get rebaptized. And if anybody out there is considering whether you have been baptized before, whether it's your first time, find a space that feels like home. For me, it is the one thing that I feel like has been missing for a long time. I try to approach every single day with love and with light, and every single conversation, whether it's something that's intended to be an argument, whether it's something that is intended to cause harm for me. Like, I have never felt more at peace. I've never felt more understanding. God has given me the ability to discern so many things, so many emotions, so many situations, the intentions behind how other people choose to interact with me and interact with the world. And yeah, it all makes sense. I hope and I pray that everyone out there, whether you're going through good times, bad times, hard times, that you are able to find peace. And if you are struggling to make sense of your situation, whether it be good or bad or confusing or feeling as though it's delayed, just trust in God's timing and lean into him as much as you can. Never failed me.